Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be talking about the Sabbath, or specifically which day is the Sabbath, and as always you can find me on Facebook, YouTube, One Way, and on BitChute. Now, the reason that I decided to talk about this particular subject is, and I want to narrow in specifically on to discuss which day is the Sabbath. So for the purposes of this video, I'm not interested in whether or not you as an individual watching this believe that we should still keep the Sabbath day, or whether we don't believe we should keep the Sabbath day. Okay, so regardless of which side of the fence you are on, right, whether we should keep it or whether we should not keep it, for the purposes of this specific video, doesn't matter. The focus of this video is, if there is a Sabbath day, or if there ever was a Sabbath day, or whatever the case might be, right? Which day is it? Or which day would it be? Now, the reason this topic came up is because there is a many of you might know of an apologetics group called Answers in Genesis, right? Run by a chap called Ken Ham, and they've got the Ark Encounter. I think those are the guys. Yeah, Answers in Genesis. They've got the Ark Encounter. They build that massive Ark replica out in the United States and all that kind of stuff. So I've followed their I follow Answers in Genesis on Facebook, and to see what sort of articles they bring up and all that sort of thing. You know, sometimes the articles are really great, sometimes they're a bit, you know, but they're good in general. I like them. Now, on one of the articles, a gentleman, I'm not entirely sure that it was even relevant to the article per se, but this gentleman comes up and he mentions something about the Sabbath, right? And so, as it usually does, his comment then led to a massive thread following it, you know, about people going on about the Sabbath, that whatever. And I noticed that there was a specific argument given to people, right, given by people, that it doesn't matter, right, and this is usually given as a defense of observing Sabbath on the Sunday. Okay, so for those who observe their Sabbath on a Sunday rather than a Saturday, they give the following defense. They say it doesn't matter which day you keep as the Sabbath, because the Bible does not specify a day. It merely specifies all. So according to the argument, it says, as long as every 6 days, after every 6 days, you keep one day as the Sabbath, that's fine. Okay? The assertion is that the specific day is not defined. Therefore, according to this argument, it could be the Sabbath could fall on a Sunday, or it could fall on a Monday, or it could fall on any day, right? And so this is the argument. So I'm here to completely blow this argument out of the water. And there are a few principles that one must think about, okay? Regardless of where you sit on this issue in terms of whether we should still keep it today as Christians or not. And as we all know, there are many people today that keep the Sabbath. So, for example, the Eastern Orthodox still keep the Sabbath. They worship on Sunday as well, but they also revere the Sabbath, right? Because the Eastern Orthodox do not, unlike Protestants and Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox do not make this dichotomy between the old Judaic system and the modern system, sort of thing. They still keep the way the Eastern Orthodox run their liturgy, for example, is they try very much to keep in line with the way the Jews used to do it back in the day. And as a result, if you ask a person who's Eastern Orthodox, they will, do you keep the Sabbath? They'll say, yes, we still revere the Sabbath, but then we still, obviously, we still worship on a Sunday as well, because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So the Eastern Orthodox will actually keep both, and the Eastern Orthodox themselves will say The Saturday is the Sabbath. The Sunday was never designed to be a Sabbath. The Sunday is designed to be a commemoration of the death of Jesus Christ. It was never meant to be a Sabbath, even historically. Even though Christians historically did keep Sunday, Sunday was never meant to be a Sabbath. It was at all. It was never designed to replace the Sabbath. Okay. This is what an Eastern Orthodox individual will tell you, and then some Protestant denominations will say the same. They will say, "Listen, the Sabbath is still applicable because the Sabbath is part of the Ten Commandments, and you can't get rid of the Ten Commandments. You can't, suddenly now murder and steal and all these kinds of things. So because you can't get rid of the Ten Commandments, you basically have to keep all of the Ten Commandments, which means you've got to keep the Sabbath as well." That's basically the argument, sort of thing. And I myself, I keep the Sabbath as well. I believe that argument to be correct and sound personally. And I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, so Seventh-day Adventists keep the Sabbath according to that thought process, according to that tradition. But now, a principle that one must wonder, right, or a question that one must ask is God a God of disorder or order? And no one will hesitate to say, no, God is a God of order. Okay? Therefore, the idea that the Sabbath can be on any day, as long as you personally do your own thing, then Sabbath can be on any day. That is disordered. Immediately you must recognize that this argument is flawed, because God is not a God of disorder. He's a God of order, and he, on something that you find in the Ten Commandments, he wouldn't just leave it up to you to decide which day that is. It doesn't make much sense. Now everyone's keeping their own Sabbath, right? And if you look back to the way the Jewish people kept it, right, you clearly saw that this principle is absent. You don't see this in the Jewish system. In fact, if you violated the Sabbath, you could be put to death, right? Okay. So it definitely had to fall on a day. Otherwise, they couldn't make a law regarding the Sabbath. And you can ask any Jew anywhere in the world, which day is the Sabbath, and they'll tell you, boom, it's on Saturday. End of story. That's just the way it is. And it's always been that way since Judaism began. All right. No Jewish person will ever countenance the idea. In fact, they'll laugh at you as it's a stupid argument. They will never countenance the idea that the Sabbath is just, as long as you keep one out of every 7 days, then you're fine. That would be the most absurd. So for a Christian to even come up with this argument, you must realize that the individual is either been somehow misled somewhere along the line. They heard it and maybe it sounded good to them and they sort of just ran with it, or they're not thinking, right? Sometimes when you come to a person with an objection and they answer you in order to defend themselves, they're merely being defensive, and they throw out any stupid argument that sounds good, that allows them to carry on doing whatever it is they're doing, rather than simply saying, like some Christians are honest. They say, yes, we understand that the Ten Commandments say it's Saturday, but we don't believe that carries over anymore, and therefore we won't keep it. So the Christians who are at least consistent will say, we don't believe it carries over. Yes, it definitely was the Saturday, but now we keep the Sunday because we don't believe that it's binding any longer. So they're at least honest. They just tell you straight away, listen, we know it's definitely a specific day and stuff like that. So one has to wonder where this silly notion, it's a very minority idea. It's a very silly idea that that the Bible doesn't specify. And so let's actually go to the Bible itself to see whether it actually does or does not specify a particular day. Now, in order to do this, because we're speaking English, okay? Because we're speaking English, we need to understand English grammar, because when you are reading the Bible, you are reading it in English, right? As an English-speaking person, I'm communicating in English to English-speaking people, right? When you are reading, and this will apply to other languages as well, they have to understand the laws that govern the language, the grammar, okay? This makes perfect sense. Now, so if you are illiterate, right, and you read the Bible, you won't be able to understand it. Now, you can be illiterate even though you can read. Okay? Now, how does this work? Because if you don't understand some of the most basic rules of grammar, then the way you interpret what you're reading is going to be completely incorrect. Completely incorrect. So there are at least some basic rules, which is why you get taught English at school. You get taught what's a noun, what's a verb, what's an adjective, what are conjunctives and all these kinds of things, what are contractions, and all kinds of different things. There's a reason you get taught these things, is because just being able to read the words, it doesn't necessarily help you. If by reading those words, if you don't understand why the comma is in a certain place, why this word rather than a different word is used over here and over there, then even though you can read the words, you are going to completely misunderstand what those words are trying to tell you. All right? And that's where an enormous amount of ignorance then comes up when people read the Bible, is because they are actually illiterate to a degree. It's actually a question of literacy in general, right? And this is one of the things that annoys me, because English is essentially it's become my first language, but it's like a second language to me, because I was born in Brazil. The first language I ever spoke was Portuguese, right? My parents didn't understand any English when they moved to South Africa, and it was just Portuguese, and then I eventually learned English. Now, because I've been speaking English for so long, and I speak Portuguese so rarely, right, so sparingly, because there's not a lot of people either in South Africa or in the UK that actually speak Portuguese that I can speak to a lot. My Portuguese has become rusty and all that kind of stuff. So my English is by far, but the fact that I'm a foreigner, it irritates me that I would know something as basic, that I sometimes know basic English grammar, whilst people who are native English speakers have no idea. And then you try to have a conversation with them about various biblical principles, and they're just so stubborn and narrow-minded and ignorant that they don't get it. And it's like, I'm a foreigner and I can understand this. Why can't you? So I'm going to introduce to you a basic, very, very basic introductory level piece of English grammar, English understanding that is applicable to what I'm about to do. Let's go online to the source. It's something that is known as a definite article, right? A definite article is the word the, okay? Level beginner, okay? You should have known this in school. The definite article the is the most frequent word in English. We use the definite article in front of a noun when we believe the listener or reader knows exactly what we are referring to. Because there is only one. The Pope is visiting Russia. The moon is very bright. Who is the president of France? This is why we use definite article with a superlative adjective. He is the tallest boy in class. It is the oldest building, and so on and so forth. Right? So this is very, very, very essential to know what a definite article is when you're reading the Bible, because whenever it uses the word the, you need to understand this is a definite article. Now, in English, there is only the word the is the only definite article that exists in English. That is it, right? You also get an indefinite article, right, in English, which are two words. A, right? So he had a cup of tea, or the word an. He use now it eludes me. I want to use a sentence with the word an. He took an apple, right? So so you've got a pile of apples. He took an apple. It's an unspecified apple. Is one of the apples. We have no idea, which one of the apples in the pile, sort of thing. Or he took a, or you wouldn't say a apple, but some people do that. It's incorrect, but he took a biscuit, for example. He took a biscuit. You don't know which biscuit. Was it a chocolate biscuit? Was it a ginger biscuit? You don't know. You just know he took a biscuit, right? So it's indefinite. It's undefined, right? So when you are reading a piece of literature and it uses either the definite article, which is the word the, or indefinite articles, you need to understand that this is trying to tell you something, right? So if we go to the Bible, The first mention of this, so we know that the Sabbath, right? If we go to Genesis 1, Genesis 2, the heavens and the earth were finished, all the host of them, and on the seventh day. Definite article. So the reader understands, right? According to this, right? The listener, that we use the definite article in front of a noun when we believe the listener or reader knows exactly what we are referring to. So when this is being read or being written, whoever it is that is writing this, I don't care who you believe is writing this, the individual who is writing this believes that you know exactly which day you are talking about when you're talking about the seventh day, right? Definite article. The seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Now, we understand that this is when the Sabbath day was first instituted, was in Genesis. There were no Jews, all right? There were no Jews at this time. It was only Adam and Eve, right? And they'd been alive one day, okay? No Jews. Sanctified it. What does sanctified mean? Let's go to the concordance. Right, what does sanctified mean? To consecrate, sanctify, prepare, dedicate, be hallowed, be holy, be sanctified, be separate. To be set apart, be consecrated, be hallowed, consecrated, tabooed, show oneself sacred or majestic, to be honored, to treat it as sacred, to be holy. Right, so the seventh day was made holy already and set apart for a special purpose already in Genesis, when only two human beings existed, no Jews. Right, the Jews were not going to exist for another 4.5 odd thousand years. Okay, sacred concept. Okay, so we get the point, we get the message, right? We get the message. So if we go to Exodus 20, so here is the commandment: remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. All right, remember which day? The Sabbath day, to keep it holy. So it's a definite article. It knows that you understand that this is a specific day. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath. The seventh day is the Sabbath, right, of the Lord. In it you won't do any work, so on and so forth. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and hallowed it. All right, so even the commandment itself tells you when the Sabbath was instituted. Right now, a lot of people again, because they're just not reading, right, they're functionally illiterate, they will say, well, the Sabbath was instituted only when the 10 commandments are given. But this is obvious nonsense, right? This is obvious rubbish, because the commandment itself tells you when the Sabbath was instantiated, right? In all that them, and rested the seventh day, wherefore, all right? So that's where the language is. So for in 6 days the Lord made the and all that in them is, and he rested on the seventh day. It's referring back to Genesis 2. Wherefore, so on that day, and that is when the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So the very commandment is telling you that this is not being invented on that day when the commandment is being given. It's telling you that this has existed since the creation. The commandment itself is telling you when the Sabbath was first instituted, back in Genesis already, before any Jews existed. So when the 10 commandments are given, it's not that the 10 commandments had just been invented, right? The Jews are merely receiving something that had already existed before, okay? Since the beginning of creation, because murder was never allowed, okay? It's not like suddenly murder became a problem only when the 10 commandments were given, or theft, or honor your mother and father and stuff like that, right? These things weren't invented only then for the Jews. It's ridiculous. What? So we were allowed to kill before? It's completely ridiculous, okay? So it's referring to a very specific day. Now, God created, he rested, hallowed it. right? Adam and Eve were alive one day, okay? So rested it. So Adam and Eve would have known precisely which day was the Sabbath day, because they were there when God rested on that day. They were there. They were present. They were there when God hallowed it. Okay? Because they were created on the 6th day. Then on the 7th day, God rested and communed with them. And he was right there with them. They were right there with him. And so Adam and Eve would have carried that knowledge with them generation to generation all the way until the flood, right? Because you would get the genealogy. So Noah would have known which day was the Sabbath. Okay? And Noah would have told his sons and daughters and all that kind of stuff which day was the Sabbath, right? It's something that would have been known. It would have been passed down from generation to generation. Now, let's, for argument's sake, for the sake of argument, right? Let's say that somewhere along the line, everyone forgot which day it was, right? There had been some catastrophe, whatever, because people will argue, what about this calendar and that calendar and the other calendar and all the calendars that we've had? Right? And they will argue that the Sabbath day has been lost somehow, and we don't know which day it is. Okay? Therefore, because we don't know which day it is, we can then, okay, now, if that is, let's pretend that the Sabbath day was lost. Is there any way that the Sabbath day could have been rediscovered? And the answer is yes. Exodus 16:4-5. Then Lord said, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, a certain amount every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law. Which law is this? The 10 Commandments. Or no? And it shall come to pass on the 6th day, they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. So, when the manna was sent, everyone knows the story. Everyone knows the story. So in that passage already, God is already referring to the law. Now, ladies and gentlemen, pay careful attention, right? Exodus 16, right? It's already talking about the law. It's already here. It's already a reference to the Sabbath, right? On the 6th day they shall prepare, gather twice as much, because they will be resting on the Sabbath. He is already referring to the law. Now pay attention. Exodus 16. The 10 Commandments had not been given yet. You will not hear anything about the 10 Commandments until Exodus 20. Okay? But we'll get there. So already here, you already see, I will make the manna fall for 6 days, and on the 6th day they will gather twice as much, because on the 7th day, no manna will fall. All right? No manna will fall, because on the 7th day, it is the Sabbath. And so the manna, the event of the Israelites in the wilderness with the manna falling, if for whatever reason prior to that, the Sabbath day had been forgotten, God reestablishes which day is the Sabbath day already then. All right, at that point, and we understand that from that point, Israel continued as a nation. We have the Hebrew calendar till this day. We have the Hebrew calendar, and we know exactly, continuously, which day the Sabbath is. And the Hebrew calendar lines up day for day with the modern calendar that we use today, which is the Gregorian calendar. Okay? There was a Roman calendar, and then the Roman calendar switched over to the Gregorian calendar. But if you take the Hebrew calendar and you take the Gregorian calendar, you will see that they line up, the days line up. So the Saturday on a Hebrew calendar is Saturday in the Gregorian calendar. The days have not shifted over. So from the days of the manna, when God established it, we have had a continuous keeping of the calendar for the past few thousand years, and so the Sabbath has never been forgotten or broken. Right? Pardon me. So let's go. And when the dew lay on the ground, so we're gonna Exodus 16. We're gonna continue. The dew that lay was gone up. Behold, upon the face of the wilderness, a small round thing, small as a hoarfrost on the ground. And the children of Egypt, they said to one another, it is manna, for they didn't know what it was. Okay. And this is the thing which the Lord commanded. Gather of it every man according to his eating, and so on and so forth. And the children of did so, some more and some less. when they did, they lacked nothing, and Moses said, let no man leave of it till the morning. And why? Why? Notwithstanding they hearkened not. They didn't listen to Moses, but some of them left of it until the morning, and it bred worms. So the manna would go rotten after one day. Which is why if they gathered in, if they kept any, if they gathered more than they needed and kept it overnight, by the next day it was rotten. It bred worms and stank, and Moses was wroth with them, he was angry with them. And they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating. When the sun waxed hot, it melted. And it came to pass here, on the 6th day they gathered, right? The 6th day, definite article. They gathered twice as much of bread, 2 omers for one man, and all the rulers of the congregation, and told Moses and said to them, this is what the Lord has said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath. There we go, re-established. And this is before the 10 commandments have been given, by the way, right? Bake that which you will bake, and seethe that you will seethe, and that which remains over lay up for you to be. So on the Sabbath, a special miracle was performed, that on the Sabbath only would the extra manna not go rotten, right? And they laid it up till morning, as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. And Moses said, eat that today, for today is the Sabbath unto the Lord. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days shall you gather it, but on the 7th day, right, which is the Sabbath in there. So again, constant language referring back to Genesis 2. And it came to pass that some of them went out of the people, went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none, right? So like Moses said, if you go out on the 7th day to gather the manna, you're not going to find any, not going to find any. And the Lord said unto Moses, how long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? And this is before the 10 commandments had been given, the tablets of stone had been given on Sinai. So did the Israelites have the law already before it was written down on tablets of stone? The answer is yes. See, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the 6th day bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. So this was going on even before the 10 commandments were written down in stone, right? So when the 10 commandments were written down in stone, that is not a sign that the 10 commandments are being invented. They are merely being codified, right? So the 10 commandments had existed since the creation, right? The law of God, the commandments of God, because all the way up until this point, you're hearing God talk about my commandments and my laws, my commandments and my laws, constantly, even though the events on Mount Sinai had never happened yet, had not happened yet, all right? In fact, you only hear about the 10 commandments in Exodus 20, but the tablets of stone are not given until Exodus 31, okay? So God's laws, then this is why we say the law of God is eternal. It is a reflection of his divine nature, etc., that they've always existed and they always will exist, okay? Always will exist. So let's go here, Exodus 20. And God spake. So here God speaks. So this is not God writing down on the tablet. And here he gives them the 10 commandments, right? And here is remember, right? Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is important, it is very important to understand this issue. In the entire Bible, God only asks us to remember 2 things, right? The Sabbath and his sacrifice. Right? At the Last Supper, right? Breaking the bread and giving out the wine. Jesus says, what? Do this in remembrance of me. So only 2 things does God ever ask us to remember. And why does he ask us to remember these things, right? So he's got all these commandments. So even this one, right? The 4th commandment is the only one that says remember. It doesn't say thou shalt whatever. It says remember. And this is very important. remember, right? And why is it that when Jesus is giving the bread, that the same thing comes out? Remember, when you do this in remembrance of me, right? The reason that is because if Jesus was not God, if Jesus was not the creator, yes, if Jesus was not creator, if he was not God, then the sacrifice would mean nothing. He couldn't save us. Simple as that, right? So remember, do this in remembrance of me. And Jesus himself, Jesus died on the Friday. So a lot of, no one has ever wondered, hang on, why didn't Jesus just resurrect the next day? Why didn't he just resurrect on Saturday rather than, why was it 3 days, right? And some people say, oh, because the prophecy said so. Yes, but why did the prophecy say so? Right? Why is it that God made it happen that specific way? Jesus worked for 6 days, right? For 6 days. We have the week, that week where before Jesus got taken and crucified. Jesus worked for 6 days, was crucified on the 6th day. On the Sabbath, he rested in the tomb, and on Sunday he was resurrected. So even in death, Jesus kept the Sabbath. Okay? Even in death. Okay? That's how important it is. And that is how we know definitely which day the Sabbath is. It's definitely on the Saturday. There's no other day it can possibly be. None whatsoever. It cannot be any other day. All right? So this is why when the Bible says remember, that, like for example the Orthodox, they keep the Sabbath as a remember, because here's something we need to understand, right? You've got these 10 commandments. Thou shalt not have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not murder and stuff, right? And we recognize, if you read it correctly, you recognize that all of these laws could be given by any god, right? In fact, many gods do give such laws, okay? But no other god on planet Earth, right? None that has ever existed has ever claimed to be creator. All right? You don't have this in any other religion, okay? Sabbath day, there is only one God of the Sabbath. So the fourth commandment is a way of God putting the stamp of which God he is, who he is, right, in the center of the 10 commandments, right? It's the fourth commandment. In the middle, that is his stamp of, right, yes, other gods could say these things, but I am the only one who is creator of the heaven, of earth, etc. And the reason you have a 7-day cycle is because of me, because I'm the one who created everything, and I'm the one who created the 7th-day cycle, right? No other religion ventures to explain this, right? The Bible, the Judeo-Christian religion is the only one. And so God is saying, because I am the creator of all things, therefore, by this authority, this stamp of authority, me, the creator, that all of these laws apply, because I'm the creator, I am God, and this is why, you know, it's like a stamp of authority. It's almost like a stamp of jurisdiction, right? So, for example, if a law is passed in a country, the president has to give sort of his stamp of whatever. I, the president of the United States, passed this law in the United States. And so it's a symbol of the individual's jurisdiction, which is why the president cannot pass a law in Russia, because he's not the president of Russia, he's the president of the United States. It's a sign of a person's jurisdiction. So the reason why Christians believe that, and Jews believe that God's laws are universal, is because stamped in the 10 commandments is a designation of the jurisdiction. God. So if we go to the verse, right? Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days shall and do all, but the 7th day is a Sabbath. In it you won't do anything. And here's the jurisdiction. For in 6 days, this is the substance. So why should we remember the Sabbath day? Why should we labor in 6th but rest on the 7th? And so on and so forth. Why should we do this? And it goes on to say, because in 6 days God made heaven. So this is a jurisdiction. What's God's jurisdiction? heaven, earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested. And wherefore the Lord. So this is the God's jurisdiction. Why are these laws universal? Right? Because God made everything. That's why they're universal. Right? All of the laws are universal because now, do we have an issue today with Christians accepting evolution? Well, yes, we do. Right? Because why do you think that is? I would like to suggest in large part, it's not merely because of the scientific evidence, because that is not actually as conclusive as people think, but Christians have failed to remember the Sabbath day. Who is your God? He's the creator. It's that simple. He is the creator. And he created things in a specific way, as he laid out explicitly in the Bible. And the Jews kept it, right? The Jews understood that this is an explicit, he created in 6 days and on the seventh day rested. It's that simple. And the understanding of that. So people like to fart around with this idea that maybe God, it was millennial and this and all these long rubbish. The Jews knew exactly what was being said when Genesis was written. Moses knew exactly, everyone knew exactly what it meant. So much so that they codified it within their Sabbath law and within their society, like literal days. It's that simple, right? If people want to argue with, fine, but then you're arguing against the clear testimony, not only of the Bible, but of the practice that the Jews kept for thousands of years, and the practice which Jesus Christ, God himself, right? God himself instituted when he gave the manna, right? He gave the manna six days and not in the seventh. God himself reinforced the idea that creation happened in 6 days just by the manna. And Jesus Christ himself reinforced the idea that it was 6 days and rest on the Sabbath by his Passion Week. Died on Friday. His work was complete. He rested on the Sabbath and resurrected. So even Christ, in his whole passion ministry, codified that this is 6 days. That was 6 literal days. It's that simple. It's that simple, right? 6 days, not millions of years, right? At all. So there's a definite day. It's a definite, absolute day, and Christians forget about this, right? They've abandoned, because Protestant and Catholic West have abandoned the Sabbath almost entirely, except for a few pockets of people here and there, right? Like Seventh-day Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, and so on and so forth, right? Otherwise, completely abandon it, right? And why? That remembrance is there. So if we don't remember that God literally meant that it's 6 days creation, that he meant what he said for all the reasons I've explained, well, then we can accept evolution and whatever the hell other people want to make us believe that it is, right? And so here, the 10 Commandments, Exodus 31, right? The 10 Commandments, and he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of the testimony, tables of stone. So only in chapter 31, which is quite a while after Exodus 20. Right, now here's something that is interesting to note, right? So Jesus, so it says in the beginning, God spake, so God spoke these words. He spoke these words, right? And then all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of and so on and so forth. And they said to Moses, speak thou with us. You talk to us and we will hear, but let God not speak with us lest we die. So it shows the character of God, right? Most prophets and people and stuff like that, they receive a revelation, like in other religions, they receive whatever revelation from God by themselves, and they're meant to go out and tell the people, right? So we basically have to take the word of this one person, right? Like Muhammad. Muhammad received a revelation. No one else was privy to this, right? The same thing with the Mormons, old Brigham Young and all those guys over there, right? Was it Brigham Young? Or who was it? Anyway, so we know with the Mormons, they had their prophet. He received this revelation. Only he could read it. No one else could read it. And then, nothing. And then he went off and sent these people down a completely different path. And we see in the Bible that initially, God tried to speak to everyone directly. right? So the congregation of Israel, which was like 1 million people strong, at least, right? He tried to speak to them all directly, but because they were afraid, they say, whoa, 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 Moses, listen, we're good, man. You go there and talk to God, and you tell us what He said, because we are soiling our pants here. All right, we're afraid. So we heard him. All right, we heard him. But you go and chat to him instead. Okay. So God initially tried to talk to everyone straight up. None of this hidden rubbish, giving people a revelation in a cave somewhere, right? Only that person alone received the revelation and stuff like that. He tried to tell them straight up. And this is why He did it, because God speaks to everyone the 10 commandments, and they say, whoa, 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 let Moses go up. And then Moses comes down with the tablets of stone where the 10 commandments is written. And this is why we know that Moses didn't make them up himself, because prior to Moses coming down with the tablets of stone in his hand to give it, we know that God Himself had spoken them. So Moses is coming down with the tablets. He's merely bringing down in codified form what God had already spoken, and everyone had heard. Okay? Everyone had themselves heard. So this is how God operates. Not, you're my precious little secret prophet over there, who I've told you something that no one recognizes at all. No one has ever heard before. It completely contradicts everything that came before, but you're the special one and you can go and make your own religion. No, that's not it. So that by the time this happens here, right, this is only right at the end, the tables of testimony. Only by the time right at the end does this happen, right? And here's another thing that's important to notice. So here's they made the calf, the golden calf and stuff like that, and the Lord said to Moses, go thee down. And the Lord said to Moses, I seen these people, behold, is stiff-necked people, my wrath and so on and so forth. Remember, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tables of the testimony were in his hand. Right? The tables were written in both their sides, on one side and on the other side were they written. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God. So God Himself wrote on these things, right? And it came to pass that when he was nigh unto the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing and so on and so forth. Burnt the fire and everything, and Moses, right, waxed hot and so on and so forth, right? And we also know that Moses, when he saw this happening, that he threw the tablets of stone, so smashed on the ground. So the idea that I think we see in James, where if you break one commandment, any one commandment, it is like you're breaking all of them, right? It's like you're guilty of all, right? Because it's the same thing. If you sin, you sin, and it's like you've demolished the entire thing. Right, which contradicts what some people say, that there's some sins are less and some sins are worse, and we can get away with this and get away with that. It's like, no, if you corrupt yourself in one way, if any little bit of corruption comes in, then everything is corrupted. Okay, that's the way it is. And so that's the symbol of when Moses, in an ironical way, when he throws in his anger at what the Israelites are doing with worshipping the calf, throws the tablets of stone and they smash to pieces. It's the same thing. It's this corruption. It's like they voided the whole lot. They voided the whole lot, right? Because it's very seldom that by breaking one commandment that you also don't break another one, right? So if you commit adultery, you're invariably going to also then lie about it. You're going to bear a false witness. You're going to lie about it. And by committing adultery, you dishonor your mother and father, for example, as well. And you dishonor God, right? So you are elevating sex as an idol, right? So you're then violating the commandment of idols, because sex is become your idol, because you go after sex as a thing rather than obey God, and all these kinds of things. So it's very, very, very rare that by breaking one commandment that you only actually break that one commandment. There's usually, by doing one thing wrong, there's usually a string of wrong things before and after that happens that you just consistently break. It's like a snowball effect, right? So it's if the Sabbath is there, right? If you don't observe the Sabbath, then it's all or nothing. It's all or nothing, right? So you can't say, right, I'm going to keep the 10, I'm going to keep the commandments, but I'm going to get a 10% discount, and I'm going to discard the Sabbath. I'm not going to keep the Sabbath anymore. We can't do that, right? And you can't use the excuse, right? So this idea that we don't know which day it is, right, is rubbish, is absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. You can go today and get the Hebrew calendar, and you can compare it to the Gregorian calendar, and you'll find that the Saturday is still the Saturday today as it was in the times of Moses. It's the same day. It's definitely the Saturday, without question. Without question. Right? So this argument that we don't know is rubbish. All right? So whether you believe or not that we should keep or not, it's up to you, right? I think I've given enough evidence that we probably should, just invariably by talking about it. But this that we don't know which day it is a stupid excuse. It's unbiblical. It's absolute nonsense. And just to finish, all right. Just as an extra little bonus, right? So we've completely settled the fact that this is that the idea that we don't know which day is the Sabbath, that it can be any day of the week, is rubbish. Okay, because all history tells us exactly which day the Sabbath day is. Exactly, it's Saturday and no other day. All right, and it doesn't matter what you call that day. It's in fact, for those of you who speak other languages will know that in some other languages, like for example in Portuguese, Monday, right, we call segunda or segunda-feira, right? Tuesday, terça-feira. We literally call each day of the week by the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. That's literally how we name the days. It's not like in English. In English, when you like Wednesday is named after like Wotan, the god Wotan, and all these, we give it all these the names of gods. But in many languages other than English, we literally just call the days the second, the third, the fourth day, the first day, the second day. We literally call it by the number of the day that as the cycle goes. It's literally how we refer to it. So so anyone who speaks Portuguese will know exactly which day is the seventh day, because it's encoded even into the language. Right, and the Portuguese is based on the Latin, and the Latin is ancient. We all know that Latin is ancient, right? So that argument is done. Okay, it's rubbish. Now here's another argument. For some reason, people always bring up this verse. And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Now here's a weird thing. It's like, in order to reject that we need to keep the Sabbath, they bring up this verse. This is one of the dumbest things that I've ever... And in this conversation on the Answers in Genesis thread, this verse was quoted ad nauseum. And people wouldn't explain. They would simply quote the verse. Right? Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a look at the verse. Said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Please explain to me here how the hell you get... Therefore, you must not keep the Sabbath from this. I don't know. It makes no sense to hear. This verse neither tells you to observe, nor does it tell you to stop observing the Sabbath. This is just a statement of fact. All right? So that verse tells you nothing about whether you should or should not keep the Sabbath. It's just a statement of fact. It says Sabbath was made for man, not the other way around. But it makes perfect sense. Imagine this. Let's say this, right? Let's replace the word Sabbath with car. The car was made for man, and not man for the car. Right? Why is this an obvious statement? Why is this an obvious statement that people don't seem to understand? English-speaking people can't seem to get it, and it grates my cheese, right? This in the context is saying the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It means The reason why this statement was made is because the Jews had this habit of making the Sabbath an idol, right? The Jews got to the point where they virtually idolized the Sabbath, where they never realized that the Sabbath was invented to serve a purpose, right? The Sabbath was made for man. The Sabbath was made because we need it, right? The Sabbath was not invented because we are supposed to give the Sabbath some kind of service. The Sabbath does not need us. We need it. Do you understand? So it's in the context, the reason why Mark is explaining this, right? Which, by the way, the fact that it's in Mark proved positive that after the death of Christ, you know, even that's why they're still elucidating these things. Even after the death of Christ, people were still keeping Sabbath, right? Even though this is very early in Mark, right? Mark 2, right? So he's trying to explain to the Jews, right? Stop with this ridiculous way of treating the Sabbath, where it's legalistic, where God said the commandment is very simple, right? Don't work on the Sabbath day. Remember the Sabbath day. It's a holiday, a holy day of commemorating that God is the creator of all things and that you owe all things to God on that day. Rest and all that. But no, the Jews made the Sabbath a hell, right? The Sabbath day became one of the most inconvenient days ever, right? And by the way, Seventh-day Adventists do this as well, right? I know I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and I'm probably going to get flack for saying this, right, from my own people and stuff like that. But Seventh-day Adventists do the same thing. Sabbath days can be they can be so legalistic about it that the Sabbath becomes a hell, right? Let me give an example. I remember we were still kids. This was before I left the church and became an atheist and all that kind of stuff. So we went on a camp, right? Seventh-day Adventists this is one of the things I like about Adventists. They love nature. They like to go camping, and they're all about being active and all that kind of stuff, which is great. So we went out on this camp, right? We're chilling out and everything. So we go on this nature walk, right? On the Sabbath, okay? Up the mountain, down the mountain, and by the end of this walk, right, it lasted like half the day, okay, or more, right? And we were like grazed, and because it was a serious nature walk, right? In South Africa, it was a serious nature walk, right? And we were sweating, and we were tired and stuff like that, and because it was a hot day, what South Africa can be like. So now we come back to camp, and there was a swimming pool at the camp, okay? And now us kids wanted to put on our swimming costumes and jump in the pool to cool off a bit. We weren't allowed. No, you can't swim on the Sabbath. Right? So me, being the kind of person I said to the adults, I said, well, you can go to hell. Right? Screw you. I looked at them seriously and I said, listen, we can climb a bloody mountain on the Sabbath, but we can't swim. We can't jump in the pool for a little bit to cool off. Really? You're going to tell me this? How arbitrary and moronic is this? Right? And this is what Seventh-day Adventists are like, right? They go completely bonkers, arbitrary on how things should be done, constantly wanting to prescribe. And many Adventists, which is the danger that the Jews did and stuff like that. This is the problem. The danger you always risk when keeping the commandments of God is you can take it to the point where you start becoming legalistic, right? Keeping the 10 Commandments is not legalism. It's obedience. But when you start arbitrarily defining how people, right? By arbitrary, I mean if it can't be substantiated in the scripture, right? When you start arbitrarily defining and prescribing how people should behave in this and this and that, that's when you are now no longer merely being obedient. You are now becoming legalistic, and you are now missing the point of what the commandment was there for. Right, and that's the difference. A lot of people don't seem to understand where the line between obedience and legalism ends. Right? It's very, very strange. So when people quote this verse as if this does away with the Sabbath, is one of the most idiotic things. I mean, if the Sabbath was no longer applicable, why explain it? Okay? it makes sense. The Sabbath, we don't need to keep it, right? But I'm going to explain what it's for. Why would you need to explain it if it's irrelevant? Okay, right? So here he's just saying the Sabbath was made for man. The Sabbath is meant to serve a purpose, to keep the creator God in the minds of man, so that man can have a rest from his week, from his toil, so that man can become cognizant of who he owes everything to, so that man can spend time with his family, so that he's not constantly working and running himself into the ground, and so on, so that he has at least one day out of the week where he can establish community and all of these kinds of things, right? That's what the Sabbath is for. Not the Sunday, not the Tuesday, not the Wednesday, not on the Saturday. Because it's the Saturday. You can do whatever you want on the other days. That's fine. Do whatever you want. You want to go to church on Sunday? That's fine. You want to have communion on Sunday? That's fine. You go ahead and do it. You want to do it on Monday? You want to do it on every day of the week? That's perfectly fine. It's your prerogative. You go right ahead. But only one day is the Sabbath, right? So by keeping the Sabbath on any other day other than Saturday means that you will be breaking the commandment. It's that simple, right? It's that simple, right? And we must notice that when Jesus says, "This is my body," right? Do this when he hands out the bread and the wine. Do this in remembrance of me. He doesn't tell you which day you need to do this on. He doesn't even tell you how often it should be done, right? Jesus doesn't, it makes no prescription. At the Last Supper, when he says, "This is, take and eat, this is my body, do the," and so on and so forth, the whole communion thing, he doesn't tell you A, on which day it's meant to be, and B, he doesn't tell you how often it needs to be done. He just do it to remember what Christ has done for you. Keep that what Christ did for you in your memory, right? So whether you do it on Sunday, which most people do, or any other day, it doesn't matter which day you do it on, as long as you do it, right? So, for example, communion in the Seventh-day Adventist Church is held once a quarter, right? And we do the whole shebang. We do everything from, because Jesus washed the disciples' feet, which is like a mini baptism sort of thing, right? So so baptism is like you die and you are cleansed of all your sins and stuff like that, and then Jesus comes and is like, "I will wash your feet," and Jesus is like, "Oh, well," and Peter's like, "Oh no, you must wash all of me then," and he's like, no, you've already been washed, right? You've already been baptized, but you've accumulated a little bit of dirt, a little bit of sins along the way, so wash your feet. It's almost like a mini baptism, like a refresher kind of thing, right? Just you go back on the path, right? You've slipped a little bit, okay, you've stood in the mud and stood in the whatever, like we do. Wash your feet. And it's also a sign of humility that you can wash someone else's feet as well, which is why we do it, right? So we do the foot washing. Once we've done the foot washing, and Jesus specifically says, if you don't do this, you've got no part of me. Which means what? Because he did this before breaking the bread. If you read the book of John, if I'm not mistaken, I think John is the only one who talks about the foot washing. The other gospels don't. John said, Jesus in John, he says, if you do not let me do this, you have no part of me, which means you cannot have the communion, which is why we do the foot washing before the communion, because a lot of people take communion and they're arrogant and they're proud and they look at me and whatever, but the foot washing brings you down. You are humble. You are not here to serve yourself. You are like Christ. You are here to serve other people. You are here to serve other people, and it brings you back into that into that state of what Jesus Christ's purpose was here and your purpose was here. So you do the foot washing, and then only from there, once you've washed each other's feet, do you go and then do we participate in the communion and stuff like that. And we do that once a quarter, and if you want to do it more often, that's fine. There's no prescription sort of thing, right? And those are the only things that are told, remember, right? So that verse is ridiculous as a proof text for Protestants. Protestants really have this bad habit of doing nonsense like that, where here's a verse to substantiate a position. It's like it's got nothing to do with the situation, but they quote it anyway, merely because this is what I find a lot of people do, right? Why do they quote this verse? For no other reason than because it's got the word Sabbath in it. They literally, that's the only reason they quote it. Oh, it's got the word Sabbath in it. Then I'm going to quote it as if it's got some relevance, right? That's how a lot of people do proof texting and all that kind of, and read the Bible. Oh, it's got the word Sabbath, therefore it must have something to do with what I'm trying to say, that Sabbath is abolished and stuff like that. It's rubbish, abject nonsense. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that helps you out. Thank you very much for checking me out, watching this video, and so on and so forth. I hope that helps you out. Take it easy. Cheerio. Goodbye. God bless.